The Rosewood Hotel's private dining room smelled like aged whiskey and power. I shouldn't have been there. My shift at Lucia's Cafe ended at midnight, and the catering company I picked up extra hours with had called me at the last moment. A kitchen emergency. Someone quit. Did I want double pay? I'd said yes without thinking, because rent was due, and my grandmother's medication wasn't getting cheaper. So there I was, balancing a silver tray laden with crystal glasses, moving between tables where men in tailored suits spoke in low voices about things I didn't want to understand. These weren't regular businessmen. The way they sat, the weight of their presence, the guns I'd glimpsed under their jackets, they were something else entirely. I'd learned not to look too long, not to remember faces, not to listen. But the man at the head of the table was impossible to ignore. He had the kind of presence that made you hyper-aware of your own breathing. Dark hair, sharp features cut like obsidian, eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and merciless. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and he didn't speak often. When he did, other men leaned forward like priests listening to doctrine. His name was apparently Dante Valentino. Even the catering manager had gotten nervous when she gave me the assignment. Just serve, don't engage, don't stare, in and out. I was doing fine following that instruction, until one of the waiters next to me, a young kid named Marco, reached for the silver carafe of something that shouldn't have been there. The bottle was sitting at Dante's place setting. He'd set it there himself. I'd watched him do it. But it was wrong somehow. I'd noticed it when I brought in the appetizers, the way the seal was slightly disrupted, the amber liquid inside having a faint crystalline quality that didn't match the other bottles of the same brand. Marco's hand extended toward it. "Don't touch that," I whispered urgently, moving quickly to intercept him. The tray in my other hand tilted slightly as I grabbed his wrist. "Don't." Something made me look at Dante in that moment. His pale eyes had found mine across the table, and the intensity of that gaze was like being caught in a spotlight. For a second, just a second, I saw something cross his face. Not anger, something far more dangerous. Recognition. Marco froze, unsure if my warning was real or if I'd just made a grave mistake. But Dante's expression shifted smoothly back to neutrality. He lifted the bottle himself, studying it with the casual interest of a man examining wine. Then, without breaking eye contact with me, he set it deliberately aside and picked up a different glass. "Bring the Barolo," he said to Marco, his voice low and smooth like smoke. "The 2009. Marco scrambled away, grateful for the redirect. I should have left too. I should have turned and walked back to the kitchen, and never thought about what I'd almost witnessed. But Dante held my gaze for one moment longer, and something in that look, something that felt like gratitude mixed with warning, made my hands tremble as I rearranged the glasses on his place setting. "You just saved my life," his eyes seemed to say, "and now I know who you are." When I finally turned to leave, my legs felt unsteady. The tray rattled slightly in my hands, and I heard one of the other men at the table, a heavy-set man with scarred knuckles, say something in Italian that made the others laugh. But Dante didn't laugh. He was still watching me as I disappeared into the kitchen, and I could feel that gaze like a hand on my spine even when I was safely behind the swinging doors. The chef was yelling about something. Marco was restocking wine, and everything else was loud and normal and safe. But nothing felt safe anymore. I just interrupted something deadly. And a man like Dante Valentino, even I knew that name, carried weight in the city. The kind of weight that came with blood and silence had noticed me in return. By 2 a.m., I was home in my small apartment, trying to calm my racing heart. The night had continued without further incident. I'd served dessert, I'd cleared plates, I'd been invisible, just as instructed. Except I wasn't invisible. Not to him. I didn't expect to see him again. That was naive, I realize now. But in the days immediately after the Rosewood incident, I'd convinced myself it was a one-off. A moment of mistaken identity. Whatever he'd thought he'd seen in me, he'd dismissed by morning. I was wrong. The first sign was the car. I'd been leaving Lucia's Cafe at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, still wearing the stained apron I'd been meaning to throw away, when I noticed the black Mercedes idling across the street. Tinted windows, engine running, visible exhaust in the cold autumn air. It could have been nothing, but my instincts had sharpened considerably in the past week. I'd started noticing the men in dark coats who came into the cafe. Not Dante. I would have recognized him with the certainty of someone who hadn't stopped thinking about him, but men who had the same quality of controlled violence. They ordered coffee they didn't drink. They sat in corners. Sometimes they watched me. Sometimes they watched each other watching me. I walked the opposite direction, taking the long way home through more populated streets. The Mercedes didn't follow. At least, not obviously, but I could feel it at the edge of my awareness. The way you feel someone staring at you in a crowded room. By Saturday, the unease had become suffocating. I was working the morning shift at the cafe when he came in. Dante Valentino didn't order coffee. He sat at the corner table, the one with the best view of the entrance and the kitchen, and he simply existed in my space. Reading a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. Like he wasn't a mafia boss. Like he wasn't one of the most dangerous men in the city. Like he wasn't the reason my hands shook as I poured lattes. He was wearing a charcoal suit with the jacket unbuttoned, and even in the casual setting of a neighborhood cafe, he looked like something that didn't belong in bright daylight. His presence was too heavy, too weighted with secrets. I avoided his table. My colleague Sophia handled his order just an espresso, which he barely touched, and I made myself focus on the rush of customers that came through around 9 a.m. But I felt him watching. Not in a predatory way, exactly. It was more like he was cataloging information, studying, observing how I moved, how I smiled at customers, how I tucked my hair behind my ear when it fell in my face. The attention was so focused it felt like a physical touch. When he finally left, an hour later, he left a $100 bill for a $4 coffee. What was that about? Sophia asked, pocketing her share of the tip with a grin. That guy must really like your vibes, boss. Boss. She was joking, calling me boss as a tease. But something about the word made my chest feel tight. He came back the next day. And the day after that, always the corner table, always the untouched espresso, always that weight of his presence, pressing against me, even when I wasn't looking at him. On the third day, I finally approached his table with genuine purpose rather than professional obligation. My heart was a frantic bird behind my ribs. Is there something wrong with the coffee? I asked quietly, glancing at the small white cup he'd pushed to the side. I can make you something else. When he looked up at me, I understood why people feared him. It wasn't aggression in his expression. It was something far more unsettling, a complete and absolute focus. Like the rest of the world had fallen away, and I was the only thing that existed. The coffee is fine, he said. His voice was even more devastating in a quiet cafe than it had been in the Rosewood's formal dining room. It sounded like velvet over steel. I'm not here for the coffee. My mouth went dry. Then why are you here? The question escaped before I could stop it. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. To make sure you're safe. To understand why you did what you did. To decide what to do about the fact that you exist. The way he said it, like my existence was a problem he needed to solve, should have terrified me. It did terrify me. But underneath the terror was something else. Something that made me understand why people stayed in dangerous situations. Because there was a strange safety in his attention. A terrible, twisted sense of protection in being observed by someone with the power to keep you alive or destroy you. I don't know what you mean, I lied. Yes, you do. He tilted his head slightly. The poison. You knew about it before Marco touched the glass. I didn't. You're a very good liar, he interrupted gently. But not to me. Not about this. Never about this. The implication hung between us that he would always know when I lied. That I would never be able to hide anything from him. What do you want? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Right now? He stood, and the simple act felt like a threat. He was tall, 6'3", maybe taller, and the way he held his body was a language of complete control. Nothing, but you should know that you're being followed. My men, for your safety, there are people who would use what you know to hurt me, and I don't allow that. So when you leave here, you'll let my men keep you safe. And you'll understand that your life is now intertwined with mine. I don't care what you want, he said, and there wasn't cruelty in it, just absolute certainty. You stepped into my world when you whispered that warning. Now the world is going to know you're under my protection. That makes you important. That makes you a target. That makes you mine to keep safe. He walked past me without waiting for a response. leaving another $100 bill on the table. But as he passed, close enough that I caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive that made my head spin, he reached out and brushed the back of my hand with his fingers. The touch lasted less than a second. It rewired something inside me. "What's your name?" he asked, still close enough that only I could hear. "Lena," I whispered. "Lena Moretti." He smiled then, and it transformed his face into something almost beautiful, almost human. "Dante Valentino," he said, even though I already knew. "And you're going to get to know me very well, Piccolo, whether you want to or not." After he left, I stood there in the middle of the cafe, my hand still tingling where his fingers had touched mine, and I understood with perfect, terrifying clarity that my life had changed irrevocably. I wasn't safe anymore, but I was, somehow, protected, and I couldn't decide which terrified me more. The car came for me 3 days later. I'd been waiting for it, in a strange way. After the cafe encounter, Dante had maintained a dangerous distance. He didn't appear again. But his presence surrounded me anyway, the men in dark coats, the way conversations would stop when I walked past certain corners, the sense of being watched by an invisible network of eyes. It was Sophia who told me about the incident. "Did you hear what happened to the Corsini family?" she asked, wiping down the espresso machine. It was late afternoon, the lull between lunch and dinner rushes. Someone got to Vincent Corsini, the younger one, found him in his car, basically a shell. Heart gave out, but people are saying it was something else, something deliberate. I'd frozen, my fingers stilling on the register. The Corsini family were rivals. I'd overheard enough conversations in my months working in the city's periphery to know that much. "Who would do that?" I asked carefully. "That's the thing," Sophia said, lowering her voice. "Nobody knows. Or if they do, they're not saying. But word is it was clean, surgical. The kind of thing that sends a message without looking like violence." I'd thought about that exchange while locking up the cafe, about Dante telling me that people would try to use what I knew against him, about him moving with absolute precision through the world, unafraid because no one could touch him. The car was waiting outside my apartment building at 9 p.m. Black Mercedes, tinted windows, the kind that blended into the night. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, and when he saw me, he simply opened the rear door. I didn't think about running. That was the strange part. I'd been expecting this. Some part of me had been waiting for it since Dante's fingertips had touched my hand. "Your evening," I said to the driver as I got in. He didn't respond. That was fine. The men around Dante seemed to communicate primarily in silence and glances. The car pulled into the city's financial district, away from my neighborhood of laundromats and discount grocers, and toward the gleaming towers where money moved in invisible currents. It deposited me in front of a building that looked like it was made of glass and ambition, and the driver opened my door without a word. The elevator ride up was silent and endless. When the doors opened, I was in a penthouse. Not a penthouse like hotels had. A penthouse like something from an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. Minimalist furniture in blacks and grays. Art on the walls that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime. The kitchen was pristine, barely used. The whole space felt like a place where Dante lived but didn't actually exist, a stage set rather than a home. He was waiting in the study. The room was lined with books and had walls in deep charcoal. There was a leather sofa, a fireplace with gas flames casting amber light, and Dante sitting behind an antique desk, working through paperwork with the focused intensity he brought to everything. When I entered, he looked up. "You came," he said, like it was inevitable. I didn't have a choice. "You always have a choice." He set his pen down carefully. "You chose to come. The only question is why." "Because I wanted to see you again," I thought. "Because you've been under my skin for a week, and I can't stop thinking about you. Because even though you terrify me, you also make me feel like I exist." "Why did you bring me here?" I asked instead. "To show you something." He stood, and even in this vast space, he seemed to command it. "Come." He led me to the windows, to the edge of the city that looked small and glittering from this height. His apartment was so high up that we seemed to exist above normal rules, above normal geography. The city looked like something you could crush if you wanted to. "Do you know what I am?" he asked quietly. "A mafia boss." Yes. He turned to face me, and his expression was unguarded in a way it hadn't been before, almost vulnerable. My family has controlled this city for 3 generations. My grandfather built it through violence and intelligence. My father maintained it through fear and reputation. And I... He paused, and for a moment, I glimpsed something broken underneath the control. I inherited an empire, and I've spent 10 years trying to make sure it doesn't destroy everything it touches. I didn't know what to say to that. The Corsini family tried to kill me last week, he continued. Did you hear that? I heard they hurt someone. Vincent Corsini was 14 years old, Dante said, his voice absolutely flat. His father wanted to send a message by having someone kill me, to test my security. Vincent was the leverage, the threat, a reminder that people I love are exposed. The pain under those words was so sharp it hurt to hear. But he's alive? I asked. He's alive. Dante's jaw tightened. And the message has been sent back. Vincent will spend the rest of his life as a living reminder that making threats against me is fatal. That's not justice. That's the world I come from. That's what you've stepped into by saving my life. He moved closer, and I had to remind myself to breathe. You need to understand exactly what you are now, he said. You're not just someone I met. You're the person who showed me a crack in my armor and then closed it again. You're someone who can read danger the way other people read expressions. That makes you valuable. That makes you dangerous. And that makes you mine. There it was again, the possessiveness in his voice. But this time, it didn't sound like dominance. It sounded like he was claiming me to protect me. Like the only way he knew to keep me safe was to make sure everyone knew I belonged to him. I don't want to be anyone's, I whispered. He raised his hand and brushed my cheekbone with the back of his fingers, almost the same touch as before. But this time it lingered. This time it felt like a question and a promise at once. I know, he said softly, but you are now, and you're going to hate it. And then you're going to understand that it's the safest place you've ever been. Something inside me broke open at those words. Not sexually, not in any aggressive way, but emotionally. A door that I'd kept locked swung wide, and I understood that I was falling in a direction I couldn't stop. Take me home, I said. Soon, he promised. First, you're going to eat, and then you're going to tell me everything about yourself. Because I don't make decisions about important things without all the information. And you, Piccolo, are the most important thing I've decided to protect in a very long time. He led me to the dining room, where a meal had been prepared, and as I sat across from him and answered his questions about my family, my dreams, my fears, I realized that I was being mapped, documented, integrated into his life in a way that was far more intimate than physical touch could ever be. By the time he sent the car to take me home, I understood that I couldn't leave, not because I was trapped, but because, somehow, being in his orbit felt like the only place I was truly alive. October turned to November, and my life divided itself into 2 separate realities. By day, I existed in the normal world, pulling espresso shots at Lucia's, smiling at customers, laughing with Sophia about the usual mundane frustrations of service industry life. I was Lena the waitress, unremarkable and safe in my ordinariness. By night, I belonged to Dante's world. It wasn't that he kept me in some gilded cage. He didn't. I still lived in my apartment. I still worked at the cafe. But the conditions of my existence had fundamentally shifted. His men drove me places. They appeared when I left work, ensuring I got home safely. And every few days, I'd find myself in that penthouse, in the presence of a man who controlled the criminal apparatus of an entire city. We hadn't touched in any meaningful way beyond that single brush of his fingers across my cheek. But the tension between us had become suffocating. Tell me something I don't know, Dante said one evening. We were in his study again, and he was watching me with the focused attention he brought to everything. Something you've never told anyone. I was curled into the corner of his leather sofa, a cup of tea forgotten on the side table. My relationship with him existed in these strange pockets of intimacy, close quarters, low lighting, conversations that felt like they were peeling away skin. I'm terrified of getting old alone, I heard myself say. I'm terrified that I'll end up like my grandmother, dependent on someone's charity, invisible to the world. I want to matter to someone. I want to be someone's priority. He was quiet for a long moment. "You are now," he said finally. "More than you understand. But I don't know what I am to you," I pressed. "I don't understand the rules." "The rules are simple," he said, standing and moving toward the window. The city sprawled below us, indifferent and glittering. "You don't see other men. You don't go places without my approval. You don't speak about me or my business to anyone. And I keep you alive. I keep you safe. I keep you mine. That's not a relationship. That's ownership." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was sharp enough to cut. "No," he said quietly. "Ownership is what happens to things without consent. This is different. You could leave tomorrow, walk out of this penthouse, and never come back. But you won't. Because some part of you understands that being with me, being protected by me, is the closest you'll ever get to mattering to someone completely." He was right, and I hated him for it. I also couldn't leave. It was 3 days later that things shifted into something darker. I was leaving the cafe at closing time when I noticed the car. Not Dante's regular car, a different one, dark, nondescript, the kind that existed in the margins of the city. And there were men inside watching me with an intensity that felt predatory. I didn't panic. My time in Dante's orbit had taught me how to recognize danger with a kind of sixth sense. These weren't his men. These were someone else's. I turned and walked back into the cafe. Sophia was locking up the register. "Hey, what's—" "Do not ask questions," I said. "Call Dante Valentino and tell him there's a problem." She stared at me. "Call him," I repeated. "You have his number somewhere. Marco or someone will have it." "Lena, what is happening?" "Sophia." My tone was hard enough that she moved without further argument, pulling out her phone. I'd never heard Dante's number spoken aloud, but Sophia apparently did know it. She dialed with shaking hands. "Hello? I'm calling for Dante Valentino. This is urgent. There's a waitress named Lena here, and—" I took the phone from her. "It's me," I said when he answered. "There are men watching the cafe. Not your men. Go to the back office. Lock the door. Don't move." He didn't ask questions or demand clarification. He simply acted. "I'm coming to you." The line went dead. 15 minutes later, he arrived with 5 of his men in a motorcade that would have looked impressive if it didn't feel so much like a declaration of war. The strange car with the watchers was gone by then, apparently. They'd decided my protection wasn't worth the confrontation. But Dante's face, when he walked into that cafe, was dark, with a rage so controlled it was almost beautiful. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the windows, at the street, at the spaces where I could be seen and attacked. His mind was calculating all the ways I could be hurt, all the vulnerabilities in a space he'd never secured, because he'd thought a neighborhood cafe was too small, too insignificant to be a problem. Then he saw me, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did anyone approach you?" "No. They were just watching." He nodded once, processing. "Who would do this?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to me. It didn't matter. By morning, whoever had sent those men would learn exactly what it meant to target something Dante Valentino had claimed as his own. That night, he took me to a different penthouse in a different building, secured more heavily, with guards positioned at every entrance. This wasn't a retreat. This was him drawing his walls tighter around me. "This is temporary," he told me, and we both knew he was lying. "Until I figure out who moved against us." "Us." He'd said us. "Dante," I started, but he cut me off by pulling me close. Not roughly, with intention. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said. His voice was quiet but contained such intensity that the words felt physical. "There are things I've done, things I'm capable of, things I will do to anyone who touches you. You're starting to understand that now, aren't you? You're starting to see that protecting you isn't an act of gentleness for me. It's an act of war." I looked up at him, and I wasn't sure if I should be terrified or devastated. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked. "No," he said, and it sounded like a confession. "God help me. I want you to stay more than I want anything else. And that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could." His hand came up to cup my face, and for a moment, I thought he would kiss me. He didn't. Instead, he pressed his forehead against mine, and we stood there in the darkness of that new penthouse, in a space that was fortress and cage, and the only place I felt safe anymore. And we breathed the same air. That almost felt like a kiss anyway. I moved into the penthouse on a Tuesday, not because Dante asked. He never asked for things. But after 4 days of living in his secondary residence with guards positioned outside every door, he simply said, "Your apartment is being watched. Stay here." And I understood that this wasn't a suggestion. My few possessions, clothes, books, a framed photograph of my grandmother, were brought by his men and arranged in the master bedroom's attached suite. The space was luxurious enough to be disorienting. Egyptian cotton sheets, a bathroom with a rainfall shower, views of the city that made me feel like I was living among the clouds. It was also, unmistakably, a cage, but a peculiar kind of cage, because Dante was always in it with me. We existed in a strange intimacy those first weeks. Not physical, but so deeply emotional it was almost more exposing than nakedness would have been. He came home late most evenings, and I'd be reading or looking out at the city, and he'd pour himself whiskey and sit in the study while I talked about nothing important, the cafe gossip, a book I was reading, the weather. He'd listen like I was telling him the secrets of the universe. "Why do you care?" I asked one night. We were in the kitchen, and I was making pasta while he watched from the counter. "About the things I tell you. You rule a criminal empire. You have actual important things to worry about. Nothing is more important to me right now than understanding you," he said. And he said it like it was obvious. Like the sun rising in the east. That's not normal. Neither are we, Piccolo. We stopped being normal the moment you grabbed Marco's wrist. We were so close to touching in that kitchen. The space between us felt charged, like if either of us moved, something would snap. But Dante had made a choice I was beginning to understand. To wait, to build something that wasn't just physical. To make sure I understood exactly what I was choosing when I finally let him all the way in. It was torture. Days blended together. I stopped going to the cafe. Sophia brought news of the outside world when she visited with care packages of books and magazines. The city, apparently, had become aware of my status. There were whispers about Dante's mystery woman, speculation about where I'd come from, who I'd been before. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a symbol. The Corleone family is testing boundaries, Dante told me one night in early November. We were lying on the sofa in the study, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. The lamp cast everything in shadow. They're putting pressure on some of my operations, trying to see if I'm distracted. "Are you?" I asked. "Completely," he said, and it didn't sound like regret. "That's the problem. I don't care about the operations the way I should. I don't care about maintaining power the way I should, because the only thing I can think about is you." I could feel his heartbeat through the sofa, could hear the rough quality in his voice that meant he was holding himself together by a thread. "Then let me in," I whispered. "Stop keeping me separate. Stop controlling every aspect of my life, and just let me be with you." "If I do that," he said, "I'll lose control. And I can't afford to lose control. Not with what I am, not with what's at stake." "You already have lost control," I pointed out. "You just won't admit it." He was quiet for a long moment. "The first time I touch you the way I want to," he said slowly, "there will be no going back. You understand that? Once I have you like that, it's permanent. You belong to me in every possible way." "I already belong to you," I said. "That part already happened." He turned to face me, and his expression was almost desperate. "Tell me you're sure," he said. "Because I need to know you're not going to wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "All the time. But I'm not mistaken. Not about this. Not about you." He closed his eyes like I'd heard him. "There's a gala in 2 weeks," he said, changing the subject entirely. "The charity benefit for the city hospital. Important people will be there. Politicians, business leaders, other families. You're going to attend with me." "Why?" "To be introduced," he said simply. "To be officially acknowledged as someone under my protection. The men who've been testing my boundaries need to understand exactly what's off limits. You're going to show me off." "Yes." "Like property." "No," he said, and his hand came up to touch my face with surprising gentleness. like someone I loved too much to keep hidden anymore. The word landed between us like a stone in water, love, and the ripples of it spread through my entire body. You don't have to say that, I said. I'm not saying it to make you feel better, he replied. I'm saying it because it's true. I fell in love with you the moment you whispered that warning. Everything that's happened since is just me trying to figure out how to keep you alive long enough to have a future with you. I reached up and touched his face, and it was the first time I'd initiated contact with him in any meaningful way. His skin was warm under my fingers, and I could feel the tension in his jaw. I think I'm falling in love with you too, I whispered. Don't, he said. Don't do that until you've seen everything I am. Until you've really understood the cost of being with me. I've already seen everything. I've already decided. He kissed me then. Or maybe I kissed him. It didn't matter who moved first. What mattered was that our mouths met in the darkness of that study, and it was like opening a door to somewhere I'd always been meant to find. It was soft at first, tentative, almost questioning, but it deepened into something that felt like surrender on both sides. When he pulled away, he was breathing hard. Not yet, he said, his forehead against mine. Let me show you off at the gala. Let me make this official. Let me do this right. How long? 2 weeks, he promised. Can you wait 2 weeks? I could. I had to. Because something in his eyes told me that those 2 weeks mattered. That they were about more than just delay. They were about him preparing for something. Steeling himself for something. Making sure that when he finally took me to bed, it would mean that he'd made his choice consciously and completely. That he was choosing me over everything, his empire, his reputation, his entire carefully constructed life. That was what the waiting was about. The gala was held in a downtown ballroom that gleamed like a jewelry box under crystal chandeliers. I wore a dress that Dante had sent, a black silk creation that seemed to exist mainly to make me feel like someone who belonged in a world of power and money. My hair was done in an elegant twist. Makeup applied by a stylist who'd arrived that afternoon and said almost nothing, while transforming me into something almost unrecognizable. Dante looked devastating in his tuxedo. When he came to collect me from the bedroom, he simply stopped in the doorway and studied me with an expression that made my breath catch. You're stunning, he said finally. You're not so bad yourself. He approached and took my hand, and his fingers were rough and warm. Everything that happens tonight, I've orchestrated. The people you'll meet, the conversations you'll overhear, it's all intentional. I need you to understand that. I need you ready for the reality of what I am. I'm ready. No, you're not, he said gently. But you will be by the end of the night. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, the people who existed in the spaces between legitimate business and outright crime. Dante's hand never left the small of my back as he introduced me, and I understood the message he was sending with every introduction. She is mine. She is untouchable. Conversations would start normally polite greeting, compliments on the dress, and then shift into something darker as Dante steered them toward his intentions. A politician asked about my background, and Dante answered before I could, framing my story with ownership. A business rival mentioned that I looked familiar, and Dante said, "My fiancé has a memorable face," with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Fiancé. The word landed between us like a shock. He caught my expression and leaned close. "I'm deciding our future tonight," he murmured. "I'm hoping you'll make the right choice." The gala's rhythm shifted at 11 o'clock. A message reached Dante through one of his men, whispered at his ear. Urgent, and something in his body language transformed. The casual air of a man enjoying his evening dissolved into something harder, more focused. "Stay with Marco," he instructed, placing me in the care of one of his associates. "Don't leave this ballroom. Don't speak to anyone I haven't approved. Understand?" "What's happening?" I asked. "Business," he said. "The kind that requires a different version of me. I'll be back within the hour." He wasn't back within the hour. Marco kept me company, and we stood near the edge of the ballroom watching the beautiful people. Other women, dressed in gowns that probably cost more than my rent, kept glancing at me with curiosity and something like envy. The men watched Dante's empty space, waiting to see if his absence signaled weakness. It didn't. At midnight, one of the city's rising drug lords, someone Marco identified as Anthony Ferraro, attempted to make a move at one of Dante's establishments. It was a test, Another push against boundaries that Dante had apparently drawn earlier in the evening. The response was swift and final. Ferraro's operation was systematically dismantled, not through violence that would make the news, through legal maneuvers, financial pressure, and subtle moves that left him ruined within hours. By the time Dante returned to the ballroom at 2 a.m., Ferraro had lost everything and was already on a plane to somewhere that wasn't this city. Dante found me sitting alone at a small table, drinking champagne that tasted like regret. "It's done," he said, taking my hand. "What did you do?" "What I had to do." He pulled me to my feet and led me away from the ballroom, away from the crowds, to a balcony that overlooked the city. The night was cold and clear. "I need to show you something." He pulled out his phone and showed me a news alert, a story about how authorities were investigating alleged money laundering at one of Ferraro's companies. The headlines talked about corruption and fraud and the fall of a once promising businessman. No one would ever know what had really happened. But I would. "This is what I do," Dante said quietly. "I don't usually kill with violence. I kill with precision. I destroy lives and businesses and futures with the kind of cold intelligence that makes violence look like passion. And I do it all while maintaining a public image of legitimacy." He turned to face me, and his eyes were so dark they looked black. "I did that tonight while you sat in a ballroom wearing the dress I bought you. I destroyed a man's life while you drank champagne, and I did it to protect what's mine, to reinforce that you're not to be touched, not to be threatened, not to be questioned." My hands were shaking. "Are you trying to scare me away?" I asked. "I'm trying to show you exactly what you'd be marrying," he said. "Because when we leave this balcony, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And I need to know you understand what that means." It means being connected to someone who destroys people as part of his daily routine. It means that your safety is built on blood and fear, and the kind of intelligence that doesn't blink when it makes a move. "Dante, say yes because you want to," he continued, his voice urgent and raw in a way I'd never heard before. "Say yes because you love me despite what I am, not because you don't understand it. Say yes, knowing that I'm offering you a life that's beautiful and terrible and completely irrevocable." He pulled out a ring, not something ostentatious, but a single diamond in platinum that caught the light like a frozen tear. "Marry me," he said. "Let me make you officially mine. Let me turn my protection into a promise." I looked at the ring, at him, at the city sprawling below us that he essentially controlled through fear and intelligence and ruthlessness. "I need you to promise me something first," I said quietly. "Anything. Promise me that when this ends, and someday it will, because you're right, there are costs to all this, promise me that you'll let me walk away if I need to, that you won't destroy me the way you destroy your enemies." Something shattered in his expression. "I can't promise that," he said hoarsely. "I can't promise to let you go. That's not something I'm capable of anymore." "Then I can't say yes." The words hung in the cold November air, and I watched his face break into something I'd never seen before, genuine vulnerability. "I love you too much," he whispered. "I love you too much to be fair about it. I love you too much to let you go even if I should. So if that's what you need, I can't give it to you." I looked at the ring, and I understood that he was right. There was no way out of this. There was only forward, deeper into his world, or away entirely. "Then I say yes," I whispered. "But I say yes knowing that we're both trapped, both equally." He slipped the ring onto my finger and pulled me against him, and his hands shook as he held me. When he kissed me, I tasted salt, his tears or mine, I couldn't tell. "No going back now," he said against my mouth. "No going back," I agreed. We went back to the penthouse that night, and somewhere between the elevator and the bedroom, we stopped pretending we could wait any longer. The moment we crossed the threshold of the penthouse, I understood that we'd been building to this single moment for weeks. Dante closed the door, and the city sounds faded away. It was just us in that vast, empty space that suddenly felt like the only place in the world that mattered. He didn't rush. Instead, he took my face in his hands carefully, like I was something precious, and he kissed me in a way that was both tender and completely consuming. It was a question and a promise at once. It was him asking if I was absolutely certain, and me answering with everything I had. His hands moved to the zipper of my dress, but he paused. "Tell me if you want to stop," he said. "Tell me if you're afraid." "I'm terrified," I admitted, my breath hitching. But I don't want to stop. He took that as permission, sliding the zipper down with deliberate slowness. The dress fell away, and I stood before him in nothing but the diamond ring he'd placed on my hand. The vulnerability of it should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like freedom. "Look at me," he commanded softly when I tried to look away out of shyness. I raised my eyes to his, and the intensity of his gaze made something inside me clench. "I want to remember this," he said. "I want to remember exactly what you look like in this moment, not because I'm taking anything from you, but because you're giving me something that no one else ever has. You're giving me access to the part of you that's soft." His hands traced down my body with surprising gentleness. Not ownership, reverence. Like he was memorizing the geography of me, learning each freckle and curve and hidden place. When he touched my breast, I gasped. "Does that feel good?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "It's just, I know," he said. "That's what makes this so perfect. You're mine. All of this is mine." The possessiveness should have bothered me. Instead, it made me want to lean into him, to surrender completely to the weight of his attention. He guided me to the bedroom, and the sheets were soft against my back. The city lights cast everything in silver, and Dante was silhouetted above me, all sharp lines and controlled power. "I'm going to be careful with you," he said, "but I'm also not going to apologize for needing you, for how badly I need this." The first kiss on my collarbone made me arch. The touch of his hands between my thighs made me gasp his name. Everything happened slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because he was savoring every moment where I was vulnerable to him, every moment where he was the only thing that existed in my world. When he finally entered me, it was gentle enough that it didn't hurt, just a fullness, a sense of being split open and remade. I felt tears at the corners of my eyes from the intensity of it, from the vulnerability, from finally having him inside me in every way that mattered. "Okay?" he asked, stilling. I nodded, unable to speak. He started to move, and it was slow and deep and everything I needed but couldn't have articulated. His forehead was against mine, and I could feel his heartbeat where our bodies connected. This wasn't about dominance or possession, though both of those things existed underneath it. This was about two people choosing to be completely vulnerable to each other. I felt it building inside me, not just physical pleasure, but something emotional. Something that felt like my heart breaking open and pouring out into him. "That's it," he whispered when I started to tremble. "Come for me. Let me feel it." When I did, it was a complete dissolution of self. I was nothing but sensation and emotion, and the overwhelming fact of him inside me. And he followed moments later, saying my name like it was a prayer. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he held me close and kissed my forehead, my temple, my cheek. Tender touches that contradicted everything I knew about him. Here, in the darkness, he was different, softer, like the armor he wore in the world had no purpose in this intimate space. "I love you," I said, the words falling out before I could stop them. "I'm in love with you, completely." "I know," he said, and there was something almost sad in his voice. "That's what I'm most afraid of. That you love me enough to stay even when you understand that this life will take things from you. What will it take? Normalcy, privacy, the chance to build a life that isn't constantly shadowed by danger." He was quiet for a moment. "Children, possibly. I don't know if I'm capable of being the kind of father they'd need." "We'll figure it out," I said. "You're too optimistic," he said. "You're going to see things that break that optimism. You're going to realize you could have had someone safer, someone normal, someone without blood on his hands." "I don't want someone normal," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I want you. Only you." He pressed his mouth against my hair, and we lay there as the night slowly gave way to dawn, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't the beginning of something anymore. This was the point where I became irrevocably his, and he became irrevocably mine. There was no going back from this, and I didn't want to. December arrived with ice and darkness. Dante had mentioned that the Renzo family was becoming restless. They controlled operations on the south side of the city, and were testing whether a man in love could still make the kind of ruthless decisions necessary to maintain power. It was the traditional challenge to an alpha, the question of whether softness had made him weak. The answer came on a Friday night when I was alone in the penthouse. The attack was planned with precision. A car bomb meant to destroy Dante's vehicle when he left one of his businesses. A team of hired assassins positioned at the location to finish what the bomb started. It was the kind of move that was meant to be decisive, meant to end things cleanly, except Dante's security detail saw it coming. He called me at 9 p.m., his voice calm and controlled. "Lock yourself in the safe room," he said. "Now. Don't ask questions, just do it." Dante. "Now, Lena." I moved without thinking, getting to the panic room that he'd pointed out weeks ago. It was disguised as a part of the closet, and when I locked myself inside, the walls were reinforced steel, and the communication systems were active. I could hear the sounds of the city, sirens, the sounds of gunfire echoing from somewhere distant. For 2 hours, I sat there and waited. When Dante finally came for me, he was wearing a suit that was torn at the shoulder. There was blood on his hands and his face, but his eyes were clear and focused. The moment he saw me, something in him seemed to settle. "It's over," he said. "Are you hurt?" "No." He pulled me out of the safe room and held me against him, and I could feel him shaking. But when I looked up at him, his face was ice. The Renzo family sent the team. 3 cars, 8 men, and a bomb that would have worked if my security hadn't spotted it. "But you're alive. You're—" "Yes," he said, "but they've made a mistake. And now they need to understand the cost of moving against me. What are you going to do?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took me to his study and put me on the sofa, and then he was working on his phone, making calls that came back from a dark place inside him. His voice never rose, never became emotional. He simply made statements about what would happen, and I understood that by this time tomorrow, the Renzo family would cease to exist in any functional capacity. But first, he wanted me to see it. "Come with me," he said at midnight. "Where?" "To see what happens when people threaten what's mine." He took me to a warehouse on the industrial side of the city. It was dark and cavernous, and his men were already there, standing around in the shadows. In the center of the concrete floor, tied to a chair, was one of the men from the attack team. The man's face was bloodied, but he was alive. Barely. This was a different Dante than the one who held me in the dark. This was the Dante who ruled through fear and precision. This was the Mafia boss who didn't hesitate to do the things that needed doing. He approached the tied man with an unhurried stride. "You were hired to kill me," he said. It wasn't a question. The man didn't respond. Dante nodded to one of his associates, and a phone was put in front of the man's face. Whatever appeared on the screen made him go pale. "Those are your family members," Dante said quietly. "In their homes, at their work, at their school. My people are in all those places right now. They're not there to hurt anyone. They're there to remind you that I can hurt anyone if I choose to." The man started to cry. "So you're going to tell me everything about the Renzo plan?" Dante continued in that same calm voice. "And then you're going to walk out of this warehouse, and you're going to spend the rest of your life understanding that you made the wrong choice." The information poured out. The Renzo family's location, their plans, their financial structure, everything. When it was done, Dante gestured, and the ropes were cut. "Go," he said. "Tell the Renzo family that I'm coming for them. Tell them that the next time they move against me, it won't be so merciful." The man stumbled away, leaving quickly. I was shaking. "This is the part you needed to see," Dante said quietly, coming back to stand in front of me. "This is the part where your love is used as a weapon against you. This is the cost. He's going to tell everyone," I said. "Everyone will know that you have access to his family, that you'd hurt them." "Yes," he said, "and they'll be terrified of me, and they'll understand that threatening you is a death sentence, and they'll stop moving against me, but you wouldn't have actually hurt them." "No," he said. But they didn't know that. Fear is a more effective weapon than actual violence. Once you've established that you're capable of it, the threat alone is enough. I looked at him, and I saw both versions at once. The tender man who held me in the dark, and this one, the ruthless Mafia boss who would manipulate and threaten and destroy anything that stood between him and his objectives. and I loved both versions equally. "Take me home," I said. He did. In the silence of the car ride back, I held his hand, and I understood that I'd just witnessed the truth of what loving him meant. It meant being the reason he was vulnerable, and it meant being the reason he was capable of terrible things. It meant being completely bound to someone whose power was built on exactly the kind of fear I'd witnessed tonight. Back at the penthouse, he took me to bed and made love to me with an intensity that bordered on desperation, like he was trying to prove that the tenderness was real, that there was something good inside him despite what he'd done. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered as I fell asleep against his chest. "I'll destroy the world before I let anyone hurt you." I believed him, and I was terrified of what that promise would cost. The Renzo family's collapse took 4 days. By the time it was finished, their financial empire was in ruins, their reputation was destroyed, and 3 of their senior associates were dead suicides, the official reports said, though Dante never explained whether that was accurate or simply the story that needed to be told. The city's power structure had shifted, and Dante's position at the center of it had been reinforced, but the cost was becoming visible. My grandmother called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was alone in the penthouse. Sophia must have given her the number. My own phone had been changed to a secure line months ago. "Lena, baby, what's happening?" she asked. Her voice was thin and worried. "People are saying terrible things about the man you're with. People are saying he's dangerous." "He is dangerous," I said quietly, "but not to me." "That's what they all think," she said. "The women who stay, the ones who tell themselves it's different with them." We argued for 20 minutes. She wanted me to leave, to come home, to get away from Dante's world while I still could, and I wanted to make her understand that there was no while I still could. There had never been a moment where leaving was actually possible. By the time we hung up, I was crying. Dante found me sitting on the bedroom balcony, watching the city as the sun set. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside me and pulled me against him. "Your grandmother," he said. It wasn't a question. "She's afraid for me. She's right to be." I looked at him. "Do you want me to leave?" "God, no," he said. The way he said it, raw and desperate, made it clear that the answer came from somewhere deep. "I want you to stay. I want you to marry me. I want to build a life with you. But if you need to go, if staying here is going to destroy you, I won't stop you. You said you couldn't let me go." "I was lying," he said quietly, "or telling a truth that isn't completely accurate. I can't let you go. I don't want to. But if you really needed to, I would. Because I love you more than I love my ability to control things." It was the first time he'd said the word love directly to me since the night he proposed. "I'm not leaving," I said. "But I need you to help me understand how to live in this world. How to be the kind of woman who can handle what loving you means." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was afraid for years," he said finally. "She was afraid of my father, afraid of what he did, afraid of the violence that came with him. And then one day, she stopped being afraid. She made peace with the fact that she'd chosen him, and she made peace with the consequences of that choice. And she was happy. Not despite the darkness, but alongside it." "What happened to her?" "She died," he said simply. "Old age, nothing dramatic. But she was happy right up until the end." "And you? Are you happy?" "Not until you," he said. "Not until you decided to stay." Over the following weeks, I made a choice to stop being the victim of my circumstances and start being an active participant in them. I stopped hiding from who Dante was, and instead, I started understanding him. I learned his routines, his decision-making process, the careful way he calculated every move like a chess player. I asked him about his business, he answered. I asked him about the men who worked for him. He introduced me. I asked him about the threats that still existed, and he was honest about the families that were waiting for him to weaken, the opportunities they were always looking for. And I understood that the kind of life I was building with him required a kind of strength I hadn't known I possessed. The strength to look at his world and not flinch. The strength to understand that he'd chosen me despite knowing I'd make him vulnerable. The strength to be worth that vulnerability. On Christmas Eve, we had dinner with some of his associates and their wives. The women accepted me with a kind of knowing nod, women who'd made the same choice I had, who'd decided to stay despite the darkness. One of them, A woman named Diane, whose husband ran shipping operations for Dante, pulled me aside. "Does he protect you?" she asked. "More than anyone has ever protected me," I said. "Then you'll be fine," she said. "The love is just the beginning. The real thing is the loyalty, and if he's loyal to you, nothing can touch you." That night, I told Dante I wanted to marry him soon. "How soon?" he asked. "February. Before spring. I want to have our life started before the world tries to end us again." He smiled a real smile, the kind that made him look almost normal. "Let's make it Valentine's Day," he said. "Let me give you that, at least. Something romantic, buried under all the darkness." "That's the most romantic thing about you," I said. "That you know it's dark, and you try anyway." The wedding was small, Valentine's Day, held in the private chapel of a mansion that belonged to one of Dante's legitimate business partners. There were maybe 30 people, his core associates. My grandmother, who came reluctantly but with a resigned acceptance of the inevitable, and Sophia, who cried through the entire ceremony. I wore white because Dante asked me to. Not because I was innocent, we both knew I wasn't anymore, but because he wanted that one small gesture of tradition before we stepped into whatever came next. When he said his vows, his hands didn't shake. "I promise to protect you," he said, "to keep you safe above everything else, to love you fiercely and without compromise, and to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the grace it takes to stay with me." When I said mine, I felt my voice waver. "I promise to stand beside you, to understand the weight of what you carry, to love you not despite your darkness but alongside it, and to build something real with you, even though I know the foundation will always be made of shadows." We kissed, and the room erupted in applause that felt dangerous and real. 3 months after the wedding, we learned that I was pregnant. I was terrified to tell him. We were in the study when I put the test on his desk. He stared at it for what felt like forever, and I watched his face carefully, trying to understand what was happening behind those ice-blue eyes. "A child," he said finally. "Our child." "Are you afraid?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said. "I don't know how to raise a human being. I only know how to destroy them. Then we'll figure it out," I said. Together. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time since I'd known him, he wept. But not everyone was happy about the pregnancy. The Moretti family, a different branch than my own, more connected to the traditional crime apparatus, decided that a child with Dante Valentino's blood represented an unacceptable concentration of power. They began making moves, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. In September, they nearly succeeded. A bomb at a cafe I frequented. I wasn't there that day. Dante's security had me move locations constantly, but the message was clear. They had access. They were willing to hurt civilians to get to me. The retaliation was swift. Dante didn't consult me about it. He didn't explain what he did. But within 48 hours, 3 of the Moretti family's senior members were dead, and the rest were scattered. The family effectively ceased to exist as a functional entity. My daughter, Alessia, was born in November. She had Dante's pale eyes and my dark hair, and from the moment he held her, something fundamental shifted inside him. The armor he wore became armor for her. His violence became protection. His ruthlessness became strategic. He was still dangerous, but he was dangerous in service of something good. On her first birthday, as we celebrated in the penthouse with cake and champagne, I found him on the balcony holding Alessia against his chest while she slept. "What are you thinking?" I asked, coming to stand beside him. "That I have something to lose," he said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I have something worth losing, and it terrifies me more than anything ever has." "That's what love does," I said. "It makes you vulnerable." "I know." He turned to face me, and in the light from the city below, he looked almost human. "I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure our daughter grows up thinking this is normal. That love and protection and fierce loyalty are the foundations of everything." "What about the danger?" I asked. "What about the violence that built this life? I'm working on ensuring she doesn't need to understand that until she's old enough to make her own choices," he said. "But yes, someday, she'll have to know what her father did, and I hope by then, she'll understand why." He handed Alessia to me, and I held her against my chest, feeling the weight of her sleep, the absolute trust she had in us to keep her safe. "There's still danger," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Always, Dante agreed. The Colombo family is becoming ambitious. The authorities are looking more closely at some of my operations. There are always enemies when you live the way I live. But I'll keep you safe. I'll keep her safe. That's my only job now. He wrapped his arms around both of us, and we stood there overlooking the city, the Dark King, his soft queen, and the daughter who would someday have to choose what world she wanted to belong to. The future was uncertain. There were shadows gathering at the edges, threats we hadn't yet faced, betrayals we hadn't yet discovered, violence that would come again because it always did. I was no longer naive enough to think that love could conquer everything, but I was also no longer afraid of the darkness, because I understood now that it was a part of life in Dante's world. You didn't escape it. You transformed it. You took the dangerous and made it a shield. You took the violence and pointed it outward. You took the coldness and learned to warm yourself by the fire it built. Do you regret any of this? He asked, reading my face the way he always could. No, I said truthfully. Do you? He kissed the top of Alessia's head, then kissed my forehead. Not for a second, he said. Not for one single second. We stood there as the city hummed around us, as the night deepened, as the danger waiting in the shadows held its breath. And I understood that this was the end of the story, but not the end of the danger. That would come later. That always came later. But for now, in this moment, we were safe in the way that only people who understood the cost of safety could be. We were safe because he'd burned down the world to protect us. And we were safe because I'd chosen to stand beside him while he did it.